chest compressions. Nothing is more important during our resuscitation than chest compressions and defibrillation. That's all that matters. So what does a good chest compression look like? Well, we know some basic things, right? The HA made the change in 2015 that we knew since 2012, that our chest compression should be between 100 and 120. That if we go too slow, and we've always known this, that the likelihood of resuscitation, because we're not producing enough cardiac output, not enough pressure, we're not going to maintain good perfusion, we're going to lower outcomes with slow chest compressions. So what did we do? We told everybody, push hard, push fast, push hard, push fast, push faster, push faster. And what did people do? They pushed too fast. So and I'm sure we still see this, right? We walk in and you have somebody doing chest compressions about 1 million times a minute. Well, we know that that's also bad. If I do chest compressions at 130, it's just as bad as 90. 140, just as bad as 80. Going too fast is just as bad as too slow. I have to sacrifice something if I go that fast. I sacrifice recoil and I sacrifice depth, typically. So we know we want to maintain that rate. That's the first thing that's important. We want to make sure that we are allowing for good and full recoil, right? When we go down, we push down in the chest. If we don't come up and allow that heart to fill, then that next compression isn't going to produce as much blood flow, isn't going to have as high of a stroke volume. So we're looking at a good compression down, but we're also looking at good recoil, which is important. And finally, depth. And one of the things we sacrifice with speed is depth. One of the things we also sacrifice with time is depth. If I try to do compressions over 2 minutes, I can typically maintain a rate. It's a depth that I sacrifice. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on that 2 to 2.4 inches, really trying to get that good depth. The next video we're going to look at is referring to the hover technique. We'll talk a little bit about that and how it works.
Pre-charging. Pause. Shock. Pre-charging. Pause. Shock.
So you can see what we did there, right? Instead of our typical technique where I would do my compressions, I would come up off the chest, I would swap compressors, I would go back on, and I would go back into compressions. We've now come just tiny bit off the chest, hit shock, right back on the chest to compressions. Now, you can do this and just swap compressors while you analyze, and we'll talk about that for a second. You could switch compressors, so you come up, you analyze, you immediately go back to a new compressor. So you charge, and then you come off the chest, and then you defibrillate, and you go right back on the chest. That's an acceptable technique, and what that does is that ensures that you've got a fresh compressor right before and right after defibrillation. Because we know to have a successful defibrillation, we need good circulation right before the defibrillation. So if I can only do compressions for 2 minutes, and I'm saying that I need the best circulation right before that compression, does it make sense that my worst compressions come right before they're most needed during defibrillation? Another technique that I've seen, which is I think makes a lot of sense to me, is swapping compressors in the middle of that cycle. So essentially, you would do 1 minute of compressions, you would defibrillate, you do another minute of compressions. So it ensures that compressions right before and right after are really good by that compressor. That's certainly a technique. So the hover technique just allows us to do that first compression after defibrillation as quickly as possible. The other thing that we did in that video was we pre-charged the monitor. So what pre-charging the monitor does is cause me to just take one pause. So I analyze and I defibrillate. So if I'm going to do this mixed with the hover technique, I've got basically two options. I can either swap compressors somewhere in the middle of that cycle, or I come up off the chest, the other person is right there hovering, because I do have to take a split second to analyze. So one person, and that's what you saw at the second half of this video, one person was on one side and one person was on the other, and essentially I came up off the chest, the other person went right over the chest, and as soon as they hit shock, they went right into it. And that's what you saw there, and that's the more common technique. So they use the hover technique and the pre-charge. So what I'm going to do is, depending on how long your monitor takes to charge, about 10 or 15 seconds. Now, most of these monitors will automatically dump a charge. Some are 30 seconds, some are a minute. But what I'll do is about 15 seconds before that rhythm check, I'll charge my monitor. It's okay that it's charged. I know it makes some people feel uncomfortable. They've looked at this, and I could defibrillate with you with just nitro gloves on and biphasic energy. You're not going to get shocked, but that's okay. I get that it makes some people nervous, but if I don't hit that shock button with your hands on there, there's nothing to be nervous about. So I charge 10 or 15 seconds before that check. Once that rhythm check comes, the first person comes off the chest. The second person puts their hands right back over the chest. They're on the other side of the body, so there's no delay here. I analyze. We should be able to recognize VFib or VTAC very quickly. So I recognize them. If I see them on the monitor, I immediately hit shock, and I tell you to go back to compressions. And what this does is this causes me to take my hands off the chest once instead of twice. And by doing that hover technique, by keeping my hands right over the chest when you go to hit that shock button, I'm immediately back into compressions. Watch this in people that aren't trained in this technique, and you'll see that there really is quite a bit of time lost here. Because I pause, the other person's kind of sitting there waiting, okay, you defibrillate, I come back over and I go to those compressions. I've lost a handful of compressions. We've done a lot of the big things to eliminate hands-off time. Right? We don't intubate anymore with our hands off. We don't stop to start an IV or an IO. We're doing chest compressions during all of this. So we're really looking at saving a handful of compressions here or there. We'll show you a video of putting an automatic compression device on and doing that quickly to save compressions. So we're looking to save a couple of compressions everywhere. So with chest compressions, good depth, good rate, good recoil, utilize that hover technique, pre-charge technique. All of those things will be beneficial in trying to improve compressions. Now, if you're using an AED, there's nothing you can't pre-charge in those cases. So we've already talked a lot about defibrillation, but just a couple of things to keep in mind. Right, first of all, early defibrillation is key. We used to think about, let's do 2 minutes of chest compressions on an unwitnessed cardiac arrest and then go to defibrillation. What would that typically look like? We do our 2 minutes, we kind of wait there, and then we get the defib on and we defibrillate. 2.5, 3 minutes later, we defibrillate. The actual number, the science, suggests that we should do somewhere between 1 and 3 minutes of resuscitation before we defibrillate. It wasn't 2 minutes exactly. We knew that was somewhere in the middle. We work on 2-minute cycles. Let's use 2 minutes. What the HA really is saying now is put the device on as soon as it's available. Well, what does that mean to us? We bring the device in with us. Well, if I go right to chest compressions and you now have to cut my shirt off, expose me, put the pads on, and do all the things that are necessary to get this defibrillator on, well, that's going to take some time. That's going to take 30, 45 seconds. I'm going to be pushing my minute. So just get it on quickly and use it. Provide that first defibrillation as soon as you can. We also know that timely defibrillation is key. So we really need to be watching this 2-minute mark, right? If you remember your ACLS classes, we have a timekeeper and they're watching. That's such an important role. Hopefully your monitor will count down for you and let you know where that 2 minutes is, but make sure somebody's watching. Make sure we're paying attention to this and defibrillating in a timely manner. When we put those pads on, we want to make sure that we put the pads on appropriately. We adhere them well to the skin. If they're excessively hairy, shave it, or put pads on, rip them off, whatever you need to do to get good adherence. If there's some liquid, blood on the chest, wipe that off first before we place those pads. Make sure no jewelry's underneath. Wipe away any medications. We want to go pads to bare skin. If we're attempting to defibrillate and it continues to be unsuccessful, this may actually be our issue, right? If you continue to defibrillate and you're not being successful, consider in your next round ripping off the pads and putting a fresh set of pads on. It could be that there was some here, they weren't adhered well, there was some air, any number of things could have prevented you from being successful. So potentially rip those off, put a new set on. Making sure that we're following the recommendations of our devices, whatever that happens to be. The AHA does recommend if you come across a device you're unfamiliar with, just go to its highest setting. But hopefully we're all familiar with the devices we carry in the back of our ambulance.